Good day, everyone. I think we can start. I'm just going to allow a few more minutes and see if we get more participants. We've had quite a number of bookings. Just want to make sure that we allow everybody to join before we start. Great, I think let's start because we are going to run out of time if we don't start. We've got quite a lot to cover today. Thank you very much for joining and a warm welcome. The Learning from Resignations webinar. This is the first one that we do with regard to resignations, and I think for a lot of you this will be quite new information. Although the resignation files have been part of Shadowmatch, even on the previous look and feel of the system, we've had the resignation files, but I know that's something that is completely underutilized in businesses. So therefore we decided to do this webinar just to share some thinking around the resignation files, and then also do the practical part of showing you on the system how you can utilize and use the resignation files in your business. So ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lizette de Villiers. I'll be doing the first bit of the presentation just to share some thoughts, and then I'm going to hand to Suzanne Conradi, the General Manager at Shadowmatch. As always, she's going to take you through the system, and she's also going to share some information with regards to the return on employment and how to calculate that in your business. You are currently on mute. As always, you're welcome to post your question in the chat. We will answer. Alternatively, we will present your question towards the end of the webinar. I will allow you to unmute yourself when the webinar formalities are over, and then you're welcome to also participate live in a question and answer session. So without further ado, let me start. I'm going to share my screen. Great, ladies and gentlemen, learning from resignations. The discussion points this afternoon, I just want to move my screen so that I can see. So the discussion points this afternoon, I'll do a short introduction. Then how is the Shadowmatch resignation risk profile created? In Shadowmatch, we refer to, in the old terms, we referred to the resignation benchmark. We now refer to the resignation risk profile. So that will be the terminology that we will use throughout the discussion this afternoon. The difference between the top performer benchmark and the resignation risk profile. What if the top performer benchmark and your resignation risk profile for a specific division is similar? What then? The resignation risk profile business applications, and then I'm handing over to Suzanne for the system demonstration, as well as the return on employment calculator. Ladies and gentlemen, just a very short introduction. Why do people resign? Now, I'm sure the list is very long and you will be able to add to my list. My list is definitely not complete, but people resign for various reasons. They resign because they're unhappy in the environment. The job just doesn't work for them. They had some sort of a personality clash with somebody and they just don't get along with their manager or their colleagues. They feel that this culture is not working for me. They don't like the working environment. People resign because a spouse might get an opportunity in a different country or different city or different region. So they might not want to resign, but they don't have a choice because the spouse is relocating and they have to tag along. Females very often resign when they fall pregnant, and they then decide that they are only going to enter the workplace again once they've had their babies and once the babies have grown to about 6 years old and they go to primary school. So again, people resign for various reasons. Some reasons are because of a negative experience in the working environment. I'm just not happy. It's not working for me. It's not what the job is not what I thought it's going to be. Or there are reasons that although the person's very happy, they're a top performer, they work well, they don't have a choice because they fall pregnant or a spouse is relocated, or they might get another opportunity in another city or town and they have to relocate. So there are various reasons. And I'm mentioning this because I'm going to refer to this again later in our discussion. Then, ladies and gentlemen, top performers. It's important to remember, and I think most of you, if not all, are either Shadowmatch consultants or current Shadowmatch clients. So you are using the system, you know Shadowmatch very well. Top performers become top performers because they do things in a similar way. They share certain behavior patterns. Top performers fit into the culture, they like the leadership style, the environment works for them, and they become top performers because things work. That's why we create a benchmark of top performers. Our benchmark of top performers becomes our yardstick with which we measure and to which we compare then applicants and candidates applying for a job in a specific division or people that are not performing as well, we can compare to this top performer benchmark to see, but what are the development areas and how can we support these people to also become top performers. The important thing here is that top performers have a congruency in their habits. They share the same habits. And that's why we work with the top performer benchmark in Shadowmatch. If we look at poor performers, the same is not true. We cannot, and that's why in Shadowmatch we do not work with poor performer benchmarks, because people perform poorly in the workplace because of various reasons, not because of a lack of the same behavior patterns or maybe the same behavior patterns being strong. I might, for example, perform poorly because I don't have routine as a habit, and routine is required in my job. Susanne might be performing poorly in the same division because she doesn't take ownership, and the job requires her to take ownership of tasks. Joni might be performing poorly because she can't handle conflict, and part of her job is dealing with difficult clients all day long. So with poor performers, people don't perform poorly because they share the same habits. They perform poorly because of various reasons and a lack of different and variously different habits in their makeup. And then resignees, or people that resign. What we found in our research, ladies and gentlemen, is if we create the resignation benchmark, or we use the new terminology, the resignation risk profile in Shadowmatch correctly, we see that people who resign from the workplace because of not fitting the environment, not being happy, not being able to perform. If we resign these people and we use the resignation risk profile functionality on Shadowmatch, which Susanne will demonstrate in practice, then we see that people who have resigned tend to share the same behavior patterns. So the resignees that resign, not because of reasons that are outside of their control, a transfer or falling pregnant and all the reasons that I've listed, but they resign because this job in this workplace just didn't work for them. We see that these people also have a congruency in their behavior patterns. And that's where we want to use the resignation risk profile in Shadowmatch. And that's what we want to demonstrate today, is how can you use that to inform your business and to inform decisions about employees in your business. Now, how do we generate, or how do we create the Shadowmatch resignation risk profile? Ladies and gentlemen, what you see on screen currently must be very familiar to all of you. It looks exactly like a Shadowmatch top performer benchmark. This, in actual fact, is not a top performer benchmark. This is one of the resignation risk profiles that I've just made a screenshot from the system and populated in the presentation. So you can see that it looks exactly the same in terms of look and feel, and the overall match, the critical match, the conceptual, the attitude, and as what you would see in a top performer benchmark. So how is this created? On the system where you have your list of individuals, and this we will, as I said previously, it will demonstrate practically live on the system. But once somebody resigns, you mark that individual as a resigned individual by means of a specific tag on the system. The system then takes that individual, sends that person to the resignation risk profile file, and as you resign people, the system starts to build a benchmark. I'm calling benchmark the resignation risk profile of what are the shared habits of people that have resigned from my environment. And this is how the benchmark is created. By merely tagging the individual as somebody that have resigned, the system automatically moves that to your resignation risk profile entity or file, and the system then generates your benchmark. Now, I want to make a few comments about a top performer benchmark and your resignation risk profile. The first one is the difference between these two. Now, I think this is quite logical. Just for the completeness of the presentation, let me just talk a bit about this. Your top performer benchmark, ladies and gentlemen, is the benchmark of the shared habits of your top performers. So obviously, you send Shadowmatch worksheet invites to your top performers. They do the Shadowmatch worksheet, and the system automatically then creates your benchmark and shows you the shared habits for your top performers. Your resignation risk profile, as I said in my previous slide, that's the benchmark and the shared habits of people that have resigned. Now, I'm going to say a bit more about that benchmark in a moment, because that's quite important, that we create or allow the system to create the resignation risk profile correctly. Now, once you've got your top performer benchmark and you've got your resignation risk profile, you might find, and this is really the exception, but I think it's quite important to also deal with the exception in the discussion, that your top performer benchmark and your resignation risk profile, just if you eyeball it, looks the same. What if this happens? They should not be, ladies and gentlemen, as a rule of thumb, they should not be the same. But it could happen that when you eyeball the top performer benchmark and you look at the resignation risk profile for a specific job in a specific division, that these might look very similar. What then? Firstly, then you troubleshoot and you say, okay, let's start with my top performer benchmark. Are all the people that I've got as top performers in my benchmark still in the job, in the role, and all top performers? If not, then obviously you perform a cleanup and you do a cleanup of your top performer benchmark to ensure that your top performer benchmark is current with current top performers doing exactly the same job in exactly the same environment. Then you look at your resignation risk profile. Are all the people that sit in your resignation, let's say benchmark for now, in this resignation benchmark, are all these people that have resigned because of environmental reasons, reasons related to the job? The job didn't work for them, they were underperforming, they were unhappy, they were negative, and the list goes on. You know better than I do what are all the reasons why people resign. If you have people in your resignation risk profile that have resigned because of other reasons, a transfer, immigration, move to another city, and you should take them out of your resignation profile. Why? Because the system wants to create a resignation risk profile to show you what are the shared habits of people that do not work in your environment. They resign because the environment just doesn't work for them. Those that resign because of other reasons that might have been top performers, what do you do with them? We suggest you create a separate entity and you move them into that entity, not into your resignation risk profile. And Suzanne will demonstrate that a little bit later. So once you've now done a cleanup, you've cleaned up your top performer benchmark, you've looked at your resignation risk profile or your resignation benchmark to ensure that the people that have resigned are those that just didn't work in the environment. Then you should see that your top performer benchmark and your resignation risk profile is no longer the same. What if they still look the same? Because we tend to just eyeball. Then, ladies and gentlemen, you need to look at the detail. We've got a couple of case studies. There's actually a case study on the YouTube channel that was done in one of the insurance companies in South Africa, where there was one single habit that was different from the resignation profile to the top performer profile. So on eye value, they looked the same, but when you look at the detail of the habits, you might see that your top performers have a very strong team inclination habit, and your resignation risk profile, the opposite is true. The individual inclination is stronger, but for the rest, the habits look very similar. Then that detail of that one single habit might be the reason why people resign. And it becomes very significant to then pay attention to this one habit that is different from the top performers to the resignation risk profile. I just want to repeat myself. This is the exception, and I'm dealing with the exception. In most cases, the top performer benchmark and the resignation risk profile should not look the same and will probably not look the same. Ladies and gentlemen, what if someone matches my resignation risk profile? I'm doing recruitment, I get the person, complete Shadowmatch, I match, and the best matches to the resignation risk profile. Then obviously that person will have a very high risk to resign. And it's maybe not clever to then appoint that person, especially if they have a better match to your resignation risk profile than to your top performer profile. And that's the purpose of this resignation risk profile, is to say, what is the risk of this person to resign? What if someone matches both my top performer benchmark and my resignation risk profile? So I'm recruiting, it's a good match to the top performers. It's also a fairly good match to the resignation risk profile. What then? Then if I appoint that person, the individual is going to perform very well because they match the top performer benchmark. However, it might not be for long because they will have a high risk of resigning. So whilst they are there, it might be a very short period. They're going to perform very well, but I will always have a very high risk of that person resigning. And then lastly, before I go to the business applications, the reasons for the top performer and the resignation risk profiles being similar. Ladies and gentlemen, should you find that your top performer benchmark and your resignation risk benchmark, after you've done a cleanup, after you've made sure that this is the correct people in these benchmarks, what if they look similar? What then? Then it means that you are recruiting the right people into the job, because you are recruiting people matched against your top performers, and they become top performers. They become successful in the job. There's another problem then. If your top performer and your resignation benchmarks look similar, then it's not because of the benchmarks being incorrect. Then it's because of the environment that might be problematic, because I'm recruiting the right people. They become successful, they become top performers, but they leave quite quickly. Then it says, I need to look at my environment. I need to look at my management style. Are there performance contracts in place? How do we manage these people? What's my culture in my organization? So then we need to start to troubleshoot and look at other areas in the business that might be the reason for successful people resigning and leaving. Ladies and gentlemen, so what's the business application of the resignation risk profile? The first one is obviously that it informs and it becomes part of my recruitment process. Your resignation risk profile is very important when you start with a recruitment process, because as I said, it helps you to see, will this person have a high propensity towards success if it's a match to the top performers, or is this person's risk to resign higher than the risk of being successful? So I need to make it part of my recruitment process. Secondly, if I have a resignation risk profile, and I'm just going to make a sideline comment, this is not just one resignation risk profile for an entire business, ladies and gentlemen. You do your resignation risk profile per job or per division. So for every entity or every benchmark that you create in Shadowmatch, you also create your resignation risk profile. So if I have a resignation risk profile, it helps me with employee risk management. So with my current people in the business, all my employees, I can now match them to my resignation profile, and the system will inform me what is the risk of this employee to resign. If I then find that some of the people that are very valuable to me and that I say, I don't really want to, or I couldn't afford to lose this employee, I can now manage that risk, especially if I can see that the person has a high risk of resigning. I can then look at what is this person's match to my top performers, and I can immediately identify personal development areas and start with a personal development program so that this person stays longer, feels that they are supported and that they are being developed in the workplace, especially if the person is somebody that you don't want to lose. Because I know some people, we don't want to keep all the employees. Sometimes it is actually better to lose somebody, but this is not the focus of our discussion today. And then lastly, the resignation risk profile is a very, very handy management support tool. If as a manager or a team leader or a project manager even, I have access to Shadowmatch and I can see how my team members compare to the resignation risk profile and what is their risk to resign, I can then manage them uniquely and I can manage them according to their habit patterns. What do I do? If somebody has a high risk to resign and I see that their match with the resignation risk profile is high, they've got a 40, 50, maybe 70% risk of resigning, I manage that person towards their high habits. In other words, I allocate responsibilities, roles, and tasks that will enable the high habits, the 5 strongest habits of this individual. And I take jobs and responsibilities and tasks that will focus on the low habits of this individual away from that person. Why? Because if I continuously hammer the low habits of this individual, the softer habits with jobs, tasks, and responsibilities, the person will definitely resign because that puts them under strain and they feel that I just can't. I can't do this job because we constantly then hammer on the low habits. So it's a very strong management support tool in managing your people away from a resignation risk. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm now going to hand to Suzanne. She will take us through the practical application, and I'm sure to some of you this will be quite new because it's also a very nice way of working on the new system with a resignation risk profile. Suzanne, thank you very much. We're looking forward to your part of the presentation. I'm just going to stop sharing quickly. Let me just move this. Give me a moment and mute myself.
There you go. Thank you so much, Lizette. Thank you for the insightful presentation as always. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great to have you back. You would know by now the standard introduction. I'm working on the live system, but I'm working with fictitious data in a fictitious company. And the access I'm using is a system user of a company. So everything I'm doing on my side, you will also be able to do live and interactively with your own data on your side. Okay, let's start sharing the screen. And today I first want to highlight a specific icon. Now, this is something you might have noticed, might not have noticed, depending on your attention to detail. But if you look on the screen, you would see there's 4 little icons there on the left. Now, the one I want to highlight today is this one here, the key icon. This explains what the various icons are that are used throughout the system and what do they represent. And you would say, here we have a list here. We have benchmark individuals, employees, applicants, and then resignees. Today, we're going to be focusing on this icon here, this type of individual, the resignees. How do I do this and where do I find it? And what do I mean by this type? So if I go into this company ABC, they have created their structure according to their unique organogram. And then in each of the roles within their area, the individuals are then marked according to the type or the function that they fulfill in the business. So are they part of the benchmark group? Are they currently employees employed in this specific role? Are they applicants applying to this role? Or are they individuals that have worked in this role but have now resigned? So if I want to change the type of an individual, it's actually quite quick and easy. But this is the important part, and remember what the introduction taught us. I only include the individuals that did not fit into this environment. If it was an organic reason for someone leaving the environment, they've reallocated, they became a parent, or they're moving into a next phase, then don't include them into this role, because you want to learn from this resignation. So let's say this individual, the one I'm going to use now, they were a financial manager in our environment, but it didn't work. Didn't go great. It wasn't a fit. The individual's unique habits didn't align, and it wasn't a fit for this individual. So this individual actually now left the environment. How do I then add his data to this? I go to the individual. So I'm going into the finance manager's role for today. When I see the list of employees in front of me, I then choose that individual. Let's say Fred. Fred was a manager, didn't work. We want to add Fred to our resignation benchmark. All I do is I simply select him. And then once I have him, I click on this actions button here. And now you would see there's an option here to say move to resigned. He's currently employee, no longer employee. The moment I select that, his type has changed. And then you would notice, let's just unmark him. You would notice he's no longer on this list. He's actually now one of our resignees. The moment the result is there, it would then contribute to our resignation risk profile. We'll get to that in just one moment. Let's say it was someone that resigned because of organic reason. They moved out of the company, they became a parent, or they relocated to a different country. That individual, if I don't want to include the result here, I say, okay, Barry is no longer working in our company. He resigned, but I don't want to add him to this individual or into this type here. All I can do is I select him and then I move him out of the file. So I'm going to say, okay, Barry, I don't want you in this file. I actually want to move you to the previous employees file. I go to that. From the actions button, I then select this option to say, please move that result. Now Barry will be in that file. He's no longer in our finance file. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I know that's very nitty-gritty admin, but that's the difference to say, okay, is this someone that I want to contribute to my resignation benchmark, yes or no? Here's everybody that used to be in the company, but we don't want to learn from that in the resignation file because they left while they were in the company, they actually worked. But if I see these individuals here, my resignation individuals there, I know I can learn from this data. So let's go and see. Let's see what happens. In financial accountants, we have now identified the individuals that did not work in our environment. So Johnny and Vilma used to work in this role, didn't fit, didn't work for us. What can we learn from their habits to manage this better and to make sure we get the full value of the data on the system? Where do I find my resignation benchmark? Underneath the tab of benchmark. So the resignation benchmark and my top performers are both on the same page. If I click on this in my left main menu, it opens up my screen. And now you would see also something you might not have noticed before. There's a drop-down option here. So the standard option is my top performing benchmark. So that's the one you're familiar with. The individuals that are currently performing in this role are top performers. They contribute to this benchmark, and this is the intensities of the behaviors that are functional towards success in our company. Any anybody that's marked as a resignee would then contribute to my resignation risk profile. So what I did there, I clicked on the drop-down option and now I select this option. Please show me the data of my resignation risk profile. Now, I know it's very quick and easy that we're jumping between the graphs, but the intensities of these habits are different to my top performing benchmark. Only the individuals at the bottom here, the ones that were in our environment, it didn't work, they contribute to this benchmark. And now we can learn from those behaviors to see what are the shared habits that they had, the individuals that didn't work in the company. Let's see how do we get the value from this data. Same as with our top performing benchmark, we can now match individuals to this benchmark to learn from it. So if I go to my list of applicants, let's say we choose Susan. If I go to her results, I now have the option, and once again, you might not have noticed this, but it standard matches her against the top performing benchmark. So now I can see, okay, what are the chances of Susan also performing in this environment? And if we scroll down, we see, okay, not a good match to our top performing benchmark. It's not such a close alignment with the individual's habits and the top performing individuals in this specific role. What is a risk to resign? Let's evaluate that as well before we appoint this individual. So let's do this. All I do is I click on the drop-down list and I ask the system, show me this match against the other benchmark, my resignation risk profile of financial accountants. I click on this, automatically populates her habits, the habits that are in the purple and the red, next to my resignation risk profile. And then, ladies and gentlemen, see what happens here at the bottom. Now the system is informing me to say, what is the risk to resign of this specific individual? So it communicates it very clearly to say, oh, okay, look at the data. It's aligning very closely to the same habits the other individuals had that were in your environment and it didn't go well. You asked them to leave or they left by own choice, but it wasn't a fit. And here we have those same habits again. There's a close alignment to it. If I want the detail of what I see visually, I have the risk to resign report, and it then highlights all of the specific areas to say, this individual compared to this risk to resign profile, what is the detail and what should I be aware of? Now, ladies and gentlemen, remember anywhere on the system, if you want to download a report, you can simply click this option here, that download icon in my left main or my left part of the screen. If I download, preparing my report to download, and now I have my resignation risk report in my hand and I can work with it. Okay, so this was an individual where we saw, okay, there's a high risk to resign. And what did we see with the top performers? Just to recap that quickly. Okay, a low match here as well. So we see it's not going to, this individual doesn't have the same alignment to perform in this individual according to our top performing benchmark. And the individual has a high risk to actually resign. So it's not looking like the optimal position for this individual within our company. Let's look at a different match. I go back to my list of individuals. And now let's select Alison. So immediately I can see, oh, okay, what's going to happen here with the match against our top performing benchmark? I'm asking the system to keep it here, my top performing benchmark, the individual's habit compared to it. What is the system informing me? We see a close alignment here. So there's a good match for this individual according to the demands of the role by the top performers. So it's looking like a good alignment. Let's just quickly go and check that risk to resign just to make sure. If you go here, remember, I simply select my other benchmark. And now we can see, okay, Alison compared to this benchmark, low risk to resign. So this is a good scenario where you say, okay, there's a high risk for this individual to match our top performing benchmark, and there's a low risk for her to resign. So it looks like a sustainable fit for this individual. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, what is the purpose of all of this? The system values the company and the individual to the equal extent. What we're trying to eliminate is that experience of failure, where I go into a role and it wasn't a fit and I fail. I have to resign because it didn't work and it's a struggle every day. if we do this informed to say, okay, we can see what is going to be expected of this individual every day. And we've learned from our previous resignees to see what didn't work in our environment. And we check that there isn't a high risk of resignation and there's a close alignment to the current environment. The chances of that individual to be successful is so much higher. So we're enabling this individual to be functional towards success in our environment, because every day is going to be a close alignment to it. The demands of that role aligns to her natural habits, so it's going to be a natural fit for her, and we evaluated that there wasn't a risk to resign. Now, ladies and gentlemen, just to quickly sum up before we move on to the next resource, the things to keep in mind. Anybody that is in my resignee type here, these individuals that I've marked as resignees, they automatically contribute to my resignation risk profile. Just as anybody that I highlight as my benchmark individuals contribute to my top performing individuals, or to my top performing benchmark. So it's the same use of the system. So make sure you do that informed and say, yes, these individuals didn't fit our environment. I want to keep that data there. If it's someone that just left because they moved to Cape Town, you can just move them to the other file or keep the results where you want to keep them on the system. If you make sure you do that step informed, then you can trust the system to say the data I then see on my graph, the data that's informed on this screen, I can learn from this. And then we don't have time to go into the specific details, but as Lizette reminded you to say, learn from this and go and look at the details to see, okay, this was what the shared habits were of the other individuals that didn't fit our environment. Let's learn from this that we can support the current individuals in our environment to make sure we don't make the same mistakes and lose other individuals, or we don't support the individuals that are performing in our environment. Okay, that's a quick and easy function on the systems, ladies and gentlemen. I urge you to please go and test it out and learn from your own resignations, that we can ensure that your individuals have an experience of success instead of unnecessary failure. The second resource I want to show to you today actually sits on our information website. So I'm logging out of the system. The reason I want to show this resource to you is that you can see what is actually the financial importance of bringing the right individual into your context, as well as I don't think anybody or many of you have actually done this sum in your head to say, okay, what is the actual return on employment? If we start bringing someone into environment, when does this individual actually start contributing and being productive? Let's go and see what I'm referring to now. So I'm going to shadowmatch.com. That's our information website. And today I'm going to this tab here, the resources tab. And then the third option on my list is the return on employment calculator. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a public resource. Anybody can access this. It's on the public website. Currently, it is in Flash, so that means it's Flash enabled. That's the way the system reads the images. We're currently recoding it that it is sustainable, because if you're familiar with Flash, you would know it's going to be discontinued at the end of the year. So if you access this calculator next year, it's probably going to look a bit different, but it's going to be the same function and the same value. It's live, it's visual. Let's see what it does. So the calculator is informing me to say, okay, think about the things that contribute to the cost of bringing someone into your environment. So the first 6 steps are showing me, okay, these are the things that the company invests to bring that individual into our environment. And let's see when we reach that break-even point where there's actually a return on that investment. So the first thing that contributes is this, the cost to recruit. So the company has to allocate cost to this, either the time out of the diaries of the HR or managers that need to do in the interview process and need to go through all of those CVs, and if we use an external company, that cost of that recruitment placement. So all of this, okay, here we go. The cost has started to run. The individual hasn't even walked through our doors, but we're busy paying already as the entity. So the cost is climbing, the cost is climbing. The next thing is now, okay, we've then identified the individual, we brought them into the environment, but it's still training. The individual isn't productive day one, because now they need to learn the ropes, they need to learn all of the internal processes and data and everything. You know how training works when you go into a new environment. So the cost is once again climbing to say, okay, we're still allocating, we're paying the salary of this individual, but they're actually not bringing anything in because we're still training. And then depending on how intensive our training is, this can carry on for a while, but let's say it's 2 months, so month 2 as well, cost of training. So we're still, you see, we're going into the negative here at the bottom. We're not climbing to the positive where there's a return on the employment, and there we go. Once we've now trained the individual to the point where they are productive to say, yes, they know the ropes, they're comfortable, they can actually do what we brought them to do into the environment, we reach a point of productivity. So the individual can now start producing and we're going to start climbing. But remember, ladies and gentlemen, we now went into the minus and only at this point, it's the productivity that's starting. So we want to make sure we get to this line as quickly as possible for that return on employment. The next thing is then, when is this break-even point? I've become productive at this point. So now you're still paying my salary every month, but I'm contributing, I'm growing. Only at that point, when I've reached this break-even point, above the line, I'm actually bringing something into the company. You're actually receiving a return on the investment of the employee you brought on board. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is logical, but think about this. Do we actually assess this? To think, if we continuously bring someone into the environment, we're not sure if it's a fit, but we do the cost of the recruitment, we start training them, and then they leave after 3 months. You know how frequent staff turnovers are in specific roles. And then we continuously play this game. Every 3 months, we bring someone new and we train again. And then it's actually, we're just going into the minus. I don't think that is actually good business practice. We might start closing our doors after a while if we just continue on that slippery slope. What we want is to make this line a bit steeper to say, let's get that break-even point earlier. So yes, there's always going to be training. That's inevitable. We need to learn the individual the ropes of what they need to do. But if we can do this to say it's a quicker, steep, the training goes quicker. The time frame is shorter until we can actually get that break-even point, then our graph is going to look a bit better. Now, this was just the information slides. You can look at that in detail and learn from each point of this. Just think about the things that allocate to this cost. Good news is you then actually have access to a live calculator to go and determine this in your unique environment. So now I'm going to click here. And now I start answering the questions as per my unique environment. So obviously the question is on the screen. I'm going to highlight that you can see how this works. So we need to indicate your recruitment scenario. So you, company ABC, what do you do? All you need to do is you honestly need to answer to say, what do we currently do? The first question, please indicate your primary method of sourcing employees. Option 1, in-house. Option 2, we use an agency. Option 3, a hiring house. What do? I've selected we use in-house. We do the in-house recruitment, that's the option we use. Please indicate the average time it takes from date of employment to date of competence. So in other words, how long before new staff become productive on the job? So I've selected 2 months to say it takes about 2 months for someone in our environment to do the training in company ABC, and then they sorted and they can become productive. What is your annual staff turnover percentage? So the percentage of staff lost on an annual basis. That turnover that we see, let's say 20% in this case, that's a general practice, 20% staff turnover. Our next questions. Please indicate the type of assessment used in the majority of cases when evaluating job candidates. So we have 4 options there: structured assessment against job-specific attributes, structured assessments with no job-specific attributes, unstructured assessment, or we don't use any assessment frameworks. So ladies and gentlemen, if you started to get a little tingle down your spine to think, oh, how are we actually bringing someone into the environment? I hope you stay on for the rest of the webinar to see the good news of how Shadowmatch can help. The good news, I think, for the audience is most of you actually already use the system. So you're going to see how that helps the end scenario. But let's get back to the general practice. So the next question, please indicate what you base your final recruitment decisions against for the majority of your appointments. So what is that? What do you base it on? We recruit against our personal experience of the candidate. We recruit against our personal experience of the candidate, and then a fit against basic job criteria. or we recruit against our personal experience of the candidate, and then a fit against critical job criteria. And the last option, we recruit only against critical job criteria match as indicated by the assessment results. So company ABC, they do use interviews and then they fit it against that critical job. Let's see how their graph looks. Now, this is the most valuable screen, ladies and gentlemen. What it shows you now is what is the current time it takes for someone to become productive and when is that break-even point? So with the data we've given the system to say this is our current practice, we can see, okay, our current break-even point here is 33 months. So for 33 months, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continuously invest and pay the salary of this individual, and only after month 33 will we reach this point where that individual becomes productive and is contributing. 33 months, ladies and gentlemen, that's a few years. Think about how quickly people leave the environment. So you might have just done this part of the graph. You've just invested in the individual and it's never become productive. Now, the good news is if you start bringing in better practices, making the decisions more informed, we can make that break-even point a bit easier or a bit closer and shorten that timeline. So this is what's here on the screen, my break-even points for specific scenarios. Let's start at the top. By replacing my resignations with successful people. So all I'm doing is the people that have left, I now start using Shadowmatch to say, okay, we start introducing individuals that match our benchmark successfully. We can shorten this timeline. But what if we also then develop everybody? We start using that PDPs. Look what happened. Okay, we're bringing that shorter timeline. So the individuals that are already in my environment, I'm developing them in the right area, in the right direction to be that sustainable fit within the context. I'm equipping them with the intensity of the habits that they need to perform in the environment. Now let's bring in a bit more of the system. Let's start using it more intensely. We use the Shadowmatch recruitment, but not yet PDPs. So we're doing the recruitment aspect, we're matching those individuals for anybody new in our environment. It's not just for the guys that resigned, any new individuals coming in, but no PDPs. You see now my breaking point every time, it's a bit sooner. There we go. And if I want the detail, I can see it there on my summary there. All the way to the bottom. Let's see what happens. Shadowmatch development with PDPs. So I'm using both of them. The PDPs are introduced. My time frame is shorter. I've used Shadowmatch for a whole year, but no PDPs. So I haven't done the development of my staff, but the Shadowmatch system has become a part of my process. So all of the recruitment has happened through that. Our benchmarks are mature because we've now learned from it. We've created the benchmarks and our resignation risk profiles. We've learned from this. What is the ideal? Once the system is mature in our environment, we're using all of the applications. We learn from our resignation risk profiles. We're doing our benchmarks, they're specific for each role. We recruit against that. We use the interview packs. We've introduced the PDPs to all of our staff members. Look what happens, ladies and gentlemen. Do you see here? My break-even point has now suddenly dropped to just under 5 months. So that is my training phase. Someone becomes productive, and off we go, and we start becoming productive. And all this time, that individual is growing and giving productive value to this company. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, what my introduction was. We're valuing the company and the individual to that same extent. Because this experience for that individual to say, I'm a positive part of this company, I'm contributing, I'm a valuable part of the inner workings of the company, that is so valuable for that individual. So I feel fulfilled. I'm going to stick around. I'm going to become productive, and off we go. And it's a happy fit. Versus if somewhere in this process, life happens and I've had some failure or something personal happening, and I haven't had that experience, I might say, you know what, I'm going to walk away. So all of the training that happened, all of the investment that was put into this individual, it's not obsolete because they break even at this point. So we didn't even reach that point where they become productive. I just quickly want to share one case study with you. So this is an actual case study of one of our clients that used the system a few years ago. They use it in their call center environment. So the system was introduced in the recruitment section of the business. So all they changed is they created their top performing benchmark, and the candidates, the new applicants they bring into the environment, were matched against that benchmark, and they then introduced the higher matches, the individuals that aligned that benchmark. After about a month of the system usage, individuals in the training department, so the individuals that are responsible for training the new recruitees in the call center environment, they went to the recruitment department and they asked, what did you change? And they said, what do you mean by this? They said, something is different because for the first time, the whole class of our trainees did the training the first time. We didn't need to redo any of the modules. It went quicker, it went easier. So they said something must be different because it's not the same experience. Ladies and gentlemen, that's such a perfect example of what the importance of this is. From day one, that fit to the environment is easier. So the training goes quicker. It's the experience of success that individual starts building their unique sense of value in the company. So the training goes quicker. So, okay, great, less time and less cost allocated to training. And what did we do? We actually did this. We make that break-even point shorter so that that return on employment starts quicker. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this stage. That's the two resources I wanted to share with you today. Just to sum this up, please go and use the resources. You have access to them. The resignation function is there. All you need to do is select, mark as resignees, and you can learn from this in the data. If you start using the functions, part of all of the processes within your company, it automatically will happen that you start seeing that return on employment easier. And that just makes sense because now your employees feel valued. And obviously the bottom line is also great for the business to see we get that return on investment quicker. Thanks, Lizette. That's all from my side. Over to you for the questions.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you very much for the system demonstration. I think it was valuable, and especially for clients that haven't used that before. It's part of the system. There's no extra cost to it. It's there. So please go and use it. I know we intend to just use the system and never do a proper cleanup. So now's a good time to go and look at your files and see who's no longer in our employment. Resign those people, those that were good employees, move them to a previous employee entity, and those that have resigned that you say they never really was a good fit in our environment, resign them so that you can start learning from this resignation risk profile. And once you go on a new recruitment drive, actually match new candidates to this recruitment drive, to this resignation risk profile. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no current questions in the chat. I am going to allow you to unmute yourself in a moment, and then you're welcome to ask questions if you want to ask your question live. Just a few comments from my side. Next week, we don't have a Wednesday webinar. We've got a webinar on Tuesday evening, the 3rd of November at 7 p.m. South African time. And that is about study methods. So this is really for everybody writing exams at the moment, your kids, those that you know that have kids that are either at school or at university and that are now preparing for exams. Some of them are already starting with their exams. The webinar will specifically focus on study methods, and the aim of that webinar will obviously be also to promote the study report to people that are currently writing exams. It's not just for schoolgoers and for students. Obviously, anybody that is currently writing exams with UNISA, that's maybe an older student, it's also a very, very valuable webinar for those people. And then on Wednesday, the 11th of November, we will have a 3 p.m. South African time webinar. The focus of that webinar will be to look at the advanced interpretation of Shadowmatch results. I know a lot of you have used the system for a long time, and we get used to just looking eyeball a result and move on. But there's actually advanced things that you can do with those Shadowmatch results to support the individual, but also to support managers and to support people within teams if we can use that information in a valuable and meaningful manner. And then on the 18th of November, that's the second last Wednesday of November, will be the Future World of Work. That webinar will be presented by Peter de Villiers. Some of you have in the past attended webinars, and the specific focus is Industry 4.0 and how that will change our world of work. Very interesting, a little bit of a new slant for those of you that have attended those previously. And then the last of November, the 25th, I think, if I'm correct, I didn't make that note here, 25th of November, we will also have a webinar, and that topic will be put on the events tab or the events tab on the Shadowmatch landing page. So again, remember this Shadowmatch landing page, you go to shadowmatch.co.za, there's the events tab, and this is where all the webinars will populate. So you can merely just go and book your seat there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to just stop the recording and then I'm going to allow for questions. Thank you very much for attending. It was great seeing all of you.